On December 12th, 2024, I was privileged to be interviewed by Chris Moffett on the Men on a Mission podcast as part of the Unplugged Alpha YouTube channel. It was glorious. Chris is an excellent host who asks questions that bring forth the information the audience wants to hear. This was my second guest appearance with Chris, so that gave us an opportunity to dig a little deeper. One of the many things we discussed was a 2024 Supreme Court decision in which the court made clear that ordinary Americans earning their own domestic income in a State of the Union do not owe income tax and never have. A quick comment about the special offers on my books I discuss at the end. If you're watching this after Christmas 2024, obviously the Christmas special is over. However, the free shipping special will likely be running for quite some time, so you can take advantage of that. Sit back, relax, and enjoy an entertaining interview from which you will learn incredibly important information.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of Moff's Man on a Mission. This is episode 3. Really excited about the guest we have on today. I've talked to Dave before. I had him on a Office Hours episode, I want to say maybe 6 or 8 months ago. Was really great. You got a lot of great feedback. And there's been some recent changes and a lot of questions that have been submitted to me about the federal income tax when it comes to things like capital gains and crypto, when it comes to filing as a W-2 or a 1099, and just who the federal income tax, if you are a United States citizen, is applicable to and who it's not. So it's going to be a little bit different this time around. Just so you guys know, the chat lines are open, or the call-in lines are open. We're going to probably go for maybe an hour or so, go through some of the questions that I have for Dave that have been submitted previously, or that I just had that I wanted him to double down on. And then we'll open up the phone lines. Guys can come on stage and they can ask him questions and, get some one-on-one advice, or just kind of try to poke holes in the argument and say, hey, what about this? What about that? Which is a common response to some of the information that he puts out. If you can't call in for whatever reason, feel free to submit a super chat. We'll hold all of those to the Q&A as well. So priority is going to go to call-ins and then to the chats after. So hopefully you guys can take some time today and call in. But make sure you're following the channel, like, subscribe, and I'll keep bringing on cool guests that have things to say and that are putting a dent in the universe. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Dave up on stage. Dave, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Absolutely fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about this. So just for the people that may have not seen the previous episode, or are relatively new to the channel, just let's do a quick intro. Talk about your background, and sort of how you got started, sort of how you sort of came across the information when you started going through some of the legalities of the federal income tax, and kind of where you are now.
Okay. Let's see. Coming out of adolescence, I joined the United States Army, became an Army Ranger. When I got out of the military, I went into law enforcement for a number of years, left law enforcement, remained a firearms tactics and use of force instructor for the next 30 years after that. Um, I owned several businesses of my own, and owning those businesses is what started me down the path of looking at the income tax. And the reason for that was uh, I went into my bank. Well, again, we're talking probably 35 years ago. And the teller, when I walked, we knew each other well, and she started literally crying when I walked up to the window. I had to do it. I'm so sorry. I'm like, had to do what? They had given $32,000 from my payroll account to the IRS. And I didn't know anything about the IRS at that time. I had an accountant on retainer. And so when you have an accountant on retainer taking care of that side of your business and you're doing what you do, it was really a wake up call. And so I was at dinner a couple nights later with a couple buddies of mine, and I was telling them what had happened. And they started laughing. And I said, I really don't think laughter is the appropriate response to this. And they said, you would laugh if you knew what we knew. And I was like, tell me, because I'm ready for some laughter here. So they shared a bit with me that night, and then they stopped and they said, we're not going to tell you anything more because we've told so many people and nobody listens and nobody cares. You buy this book and this book. and you read them, and then come back to us and we'll talk to you. Okay. The next day, right? This was pre-internet, right? The next day, I jumped on the 800 numbers to these companies and ordered their books and started reading through them. And I think most pointedly, because of my time in law enforcement, I understood that if I want to come take your property as an example, right, I have to have a warrant. But yet it seemed that the government was free to take $32,000, which back then was a lot of money, right? To take $32,000 out of my payroll account with no legal process. Some bureaucrat, some low-level employee, not even to the level of bureaucrat, some low-level employee pulled a form out of their desk drawer, signed their name, walked down the hall, got their supervisor to countersign it, ripped off the cover sheet, mailed it to the bank, and the bank gave them my property. I was like, okay, so because I had read the Constitution many times, I knew that there was no income tax exception to the Fourth Amendment. And yet, with no legal due process, my money was gone. Okay. So I knew something was amiss, and I didn't know what it was. But once I knew something was amiss, I wanted to understand what it was. And here we are almost 32 years later talking about the income tax.
So you really started out, knowing the Constitution, because most people don't read the Constitution, especially for fun, but you had to do it through law enforcement. You have to swear to it that you're going to uphold the Constitution of the United States. So there's a portion of that is I answer this question plainly. Are you saying there's no law written in the Constitution that dictates who the income tax is imposed upon, or that says that the vast majority or 99% of US citizens, Americans, are on the hook to pay a federal income tax on their income every year?
I think the way I'd like to characterize it is this, that the law does very specifically dictate who the tax is imposed upon, who the tax is to be collected upon, and in certain circumstances, who has to withhold that tax from the people upon whom the tax has been imposed. But here's the thing. The tax has been imposed, if we just talk about society generally, right? The tax has been imposed on like this little tiny percentage of people. And yet the public narrative is everybody owes income tax, when the truth is, and let me say this plainly, this is what the law doesn't say who the tax does not apply to. Law doesn't operate that way, right? So as I always say, I'm arguably the most knowledgeable person in the country about whom the income tax has been imposed, and by association, who it is not. Does that make sense? Okay,
Sure.
so a very accurate legal statement would be, if you're an American citizen or a legal resident living and working in one of the states in the Union, earning your own domestic income, there is no law at all that requires you to have any withholding done, to file 1040s, and to pay the government one red cent. None. Zero.
So if that's the case, and if that is true, who is the income tax actually imposed upon? Who is the small sliver of, I won't even say Americans, but people that are, because I kind of know the answer, but what are the classifications or the categories of folks that are on the hook, that are liable to pay income tax in the US?
Okay. So according to US law, and I want to keep stressing this because it's not me saying it, it's Congress saying it in its statutes, and it's the Secretary of the Treasury saying it in his regulations. So it's not me. I'm just sharing, because people don't read any of those things, right?
Right.
So I'm just sharing what the law says. Okay. The number one category, there's three. Number one category upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax: non-resident aliens with US source income. Number two, foreign corporations with US source income. And number three, US citizens residing abroad with foreign earned income, which is even more narrow than it sounds. And for the purpose of this call, let's not talk about that because it
Okay.
may involve 1/1000th of 1% of Americans. It's not worth taking our time with, and it's very sort of convoluted. So for the purpose of today's call, the 99.9% of the people who are listening who fit that profile, which is an American citizen living and working in one of the states of the union, earning their own domestic source income. For the purpose of those people, we can simply say there are two classes upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax: non-resident aliens with U.S. source income and foreign corporations with U.S. source income. And moving forward, so you and I don't have to keep repeating that, let's just refer to them by the shorter term foreign persons. So foreign persons with U.S. source income. That's upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax.
So for layman's terms, essentially, you are a non-resident alien, or so you're essentially now, if you're a resident alien, let's say you have a green card, does that change things? I mean, so what do you, non-resident alien meaning I don't have a right to kind of be here and work in the US. I'm essentially a foreign national, but I'm working for some US company that's paying me under the table essentially. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's legal, right? So how is a non-resident alien even getting paid by a US company?
Okay. That means somebody who is in this country, according to the tax code, not me,
Sure.
who is in this country 181 days or less.
Okay.
That's a non-resident alien. Okay. If a person is a legally admitted resident alien, what a lot of people refer to as green card holders, the same rules apply to them as apply to you and me.
Understood. Okay. The second one being corporations that are based outside of the US but are getting US source income. So is there an example that you can think of or something off the top of your head where that would apply?
Sure. Let's say there's a corporation in Europe and they want to invest in Apple just to increase their bottom line, right? So they want the share values, they anticipate they're going to increase, they want the dividends. So they reach out to a US brokerage house and they open a brokerage account and they direct the brokerage company to invest, we'll call it $1 million for the sake of simplicity, to invest $1 million in Apple shares. And so the Apple shares appreciate, which is not immediately relevant to income tax, but they are paid dividends, which is immediately relevant to income tax. And then that foreign corporation owes US income tax. Now, because we're talking about the brokerage house, this brings up, we talked about, again, I'm going to limit it to two classes for the purpose of today. We talked about the two classes upon whom the income tax has been imposed. So in this particular scenario, let's say the corporation in Europe, let's call it Renault from France, right? So before the dividends paid by Apple, they go to the brokerage, first of all, they go to the brokerage account. Before the brokerage firm pays those dividends over to Renault, they have to withhold the US income tax because, as you can imagine, once the money was out of the United States and sitting in Renault's French bank account, they would not be disposed to pay the US income tax. They've already got their money, they're outside US jurisdiction. Why would they? So the way US tax law works is anytime that money is going to a foreign person that is subject to the income tax, if it involves what they call a domestic agent, the domestic agent is required to deduct and withhold the US income tax and then send the balance on to the foreign person.
Okay. This stuff gets complicated quick, huh? Okay, understood. Well, and I understand we want to talk about the first two classes. I will say what I've seen remote work and especially there's this whole idea of like the expat movement. In the colloquialism in some of the circles we run is like passport bros. Now, usually that involves, hey, we don't want to stick around in the US. We'd rather go overseas and go to Thailand or Bali or something where, you know, women are more feminine or regardless, whatever it might be. But somebody that doesn't renounce their US citizenship and goes overseas somewhere, if they are making money, let's say they open a business, they open a coffee shop or a tattoo parlor somewhere, they're receiving foreign income, they would still be technically on the hook to pay US income tax. So I have that right?
No,
Okay.
there are some qualifiers to that. And again, we could spend quite a bit of time talking about what those qualifiers are and the permutations, and it has a lot to do with whether you're there at the behest of the federal government and so forth.
Okay.
So no. if somebody lives in, like you said, Bali, and
Mhm.
they're earning money to sustain themselves, they're earning money in Bali to sustain themselves in Bali. There's no U.S. taxation on that.
Okay, understood. I'm sure there's a couple folks out there because there's guys that I know that are doing that same thing. They're overseas, like, well, like I haven't renounced citizenship, but I still have foreign source income. Do I kind of follow? So do and guys, before we go any further, let me say really quickly, I didn't do this at the beginning of the show, and I always should. And regardless of what you hear today, none of this is financial nor legal advice. Do your own research, see if this all makes sense and holds water. Dave, really quickly, can you cite, and I know you have these at the top of your head, can you cite a couple of the important U.S. court cases that establish these sort of clauses and establish who is the tax imposed upon, in case people want to kind of do their own reading and they want to kind of fact check this, so to speak?
Okay, so in terms of non-resident aliens and foreign corporations with U.S. source income, probably the seminal case on that is Bruce v. Union Pacific Railroad from 1916, and the reason it's Bruce v. Union Pacific Railroad is Bruce was an American citizen living in New York, and he was the what we now call in modern tax law, he was the domestic agent, also referred to in tax law as a U.S. person. He was the domestic agent for a foreign person who had invested in the Union Pacific Railroad. And there was a question of whether Frank Bruce, as in Bruce v. Union Pacific Railroad, whether Frank was required to withhold and pay over the tax to the United States government. So that's the very first case. But there are very few cases that deal specifically with the non-resident alien foreign corporation issue. But here's the way I encourage people to do their own research on this. Okay, so if what people call it just out in society, we talk about the income tax, right? We just commonly call it income tax. Well, if you want to know what it is legally, it's in Title 26 of the United States Code, Subtitle A. What everybody calls income tax, all of it's in Subtitle A. Okay. So Subtitle A, it's got more chapters over the years, but the primary chapters are 1, 2, and 3. Okay. And chapter 1, normal taxes and surcharge taxes. Then chapter 2 is I forget the exact language they use in the title, but self-employment tax. Okay. Um, and people get confused by those titles. And then they get to chapter 3, and it says withholding on U.S. source income from non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. Okay. So here's what the average Joe does, which, by the way, I did my first couple of years when I was researching. So I am as guilty as anybody else of having done this. Chapters 1 and 2 are voluminous. So I would spend all this time going through all these different statutes and regulations. And then I'm working my way through, and then I get to chapter 3, and I turn the page, and there's chapter 3, withholding on non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. Well, shit, that's not the right one. And I go back to 1 and 2, looking for my answers. And it took me a while to realize that this is the way people who want to understand how the tax code is written, who it applies to, who it doesn't, how it's put together, is this. Chapters 1 and 2 are what I refer to as the rules of computation. In other words, if somebody has had the income tax imposed upon them, chapters 1 and 2 explain how to figure out the amount of tax that kind of person owes the government. Okay. That's all 1 and 2 are. You can just say the computations to figure out how much. Boom. With that sentence, you've completely embodied chapters 1 and 2. Every tax law in history has a collection mechanism attached to it. Because what good does it do to impose a tax without the law specifying who can collect, from who the collection can be done, how it is to be done, when it is to be done, right? Without that, the tax is irrelevant, right? So every tax law in US history has a collection mechanism. Chapter 3 entitled Withholding of U.S. Source Income from Non-Resident Aliens and Foreign Corporations is the collection mechanism. So chapters 1 and chapters 2, it's all about non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. Then chapter 3 explains here's how you go about collecting that tax from them. This, for people who this may be a case of first impressions, that may sound really unusual, and some people may be thinking, I call bullshit on that. But when you read it straight through, the light bulb comes on. You go, "Ah, it's so simple when you look at it correctly."
So read it is your advice. So read it and understand it.
Yes, yes. And we didn't talk about at the outset. We didn't talk about income tax shattering the myths, which is my book
Mhm.
where I lay this all out. It's been out 15 years now. And so all of the things, yeah, thank you. All of the things that we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to guess 99% of the things we're talking about today, people will find mountains of incontrovertible evidence of that in income tax shattering the myths. And I don't know how many tens of thousands of people who've read it over the last 15 years, but I assure you this, every single person who reads it, when they get to the final page and they close the book, there is no doubt in their mind about upon whom the tax has been imposed and who it is not. The evidence is, not only is it mountainous, it's incontrovertible.
So if all this is true, Dave, and everything is as you say, why don't more people know about this? What are some of is this just a gigantic propaganda campaign by the US government? I mean, I can't imagine they would ever do that about anything, right? So what is it exactly? Why is this so suppressed? Like how, what is the suppression mechanisms they use, or what are some of these tactics that they use to keep people in the dark?
Number one, fear. Um, the government has sort of fallen out of this habit, to be clear. But for decades, I used to refer to January 1st through April 15th as the US government annual tax terrorism season. And that is when they would go out and they would just pick people to prosecute. And then they would probably, normally these prosecutions would begin in September, October, November the year before. And what they were looking to do was come to trial and get a conviction sometime between January 1st and April 15th. And then the US Treasury Department, their PR people would contact all the various news organizations. And then boom, 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 all these stories about people getting convicted of tax crimes. Okay. And that was an intentional campaign of fear, plain and simple. So the number one obstacle is fear. I think the number two obstacle is what you alluded to. There's been so much propaganda from the government over the last 60 years. And I will add, it is perhaps the most successful disinformation campaign in all of human history. Okay. Because if you and I live near Vegas, so if you and I were walking down the street in Vegas and we stopped 100 random people and asked them if it's true that the income tax applies to everybody who earns a living, I'm guessing 98 out of 100 would say absolutely. Okay. That's how brainwashed the American public is. And there's been a lot of famous expositors who've commented when people are brainwashed. And there's a couple of things about being brainwashed. Number one, if it's done right, you're not aware you're brainwashed. So these people actually believe something that isn't true because not only the government has been telling them for their entire life that everybody owes the income tax, but then their mom and their dad tell them that, and their aunts and their uncles tell them that, and the company they work for tell them that, and all their friends tell them that. So they're really faced with this situation where somebody has to, how can I describe this? And I think this goes to the theme of that ad, for instance, that you ran at the outset. Okay. Somebody actually has to show some fucking testicles. They have to say, you know what, mom and dad? I really don't give a shit what you tell me about this subject. And you know what, aunt and uncle, the same for you. And all you people at work, go fuck yourself. I don't give a shit what you think. I'm going to read this book, or I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to come to my own determination. I don't give a shit what you people think. But people aren't built like that. That takes a special kind of person, and I think there's damn few of them around. And I think that also explains why. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was putting Income Tax Shattering the Myths together, I thought, because at the time when I was writing it, there was no single comprehensive compendium available in the entire country telling the truth about the income tax. None, which I thought was a huge omission in getting the truth out there. And so, in my naivete, I thought, I'm going to put this grand compendium together with everything anyone could want to know about the income tax to make it clear it doesn't apply to the average American. And when they see the mountains of incontrovertible evidence, boy, this news is going to spread like wildfire. I'm going to sell millions of copies. As a side note, I'll become a millionaire and we'll free the country from the income tax. And as I just alluded to a moment ago, I have sold some amount of tens of thousands, right? We're not even into the hundreds of thousands yet, 15 years later. And I think that speaks to what we were just talking about, that somebody actually has to believe that the narrative either is false or really could be false to buy the book and spend the time reading it. And the government's propaganda campaign has been so successful that the vast majority of Americans refuse to acknowledge that they're brainwashed. And when you tell them politely or otherwise that they're brainwashed, that's not what the law says. Uh, Either they get very angry or they just shut down and walk away. So the percentage of Americans that actually have the testicular fortitude to say, screw all you people, I'm going to go find out for myself. I mean, we're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population. I think that's the number one reason that the truth hasn't caught fire.
And then to that point, I mean, myself and my co-host Rich, who runs the channel and who is a business partner of mine, we're very much embodying of the tribe mindset. Like, you're on the inside or you're the outside, right? You can earn your way on the inside, but you've got to put some skin in the game. You've got to prove yourself, etc. But you are of the school that's a little more like, hey, I want to reach people far and wide. I want to, we call it unplugging from the matrix, so to speak, like the unbrainwashing. We want to unplug as many people as possible. But with that, I'm sure has come with, like you said, vitriol, hate mail, people that are trying to put you in jail. I mean, and we can mention, I know we talked about this last time, but you can briefly talk about, the injunction. But the fact of the matter is, you've never been convicted of any sort of tax fraud or crime. You've never done any
Or accused,
or refused,
or even
right?
accused.
Or accused. You've never done jail time. You've never been. So there's, and you've been this mouthpiece for this sort of tax honesty movement for the last 30 years. And so what was that process like for you, where you were fine, you were excited, right? But when that stuff started happening, how did that strengthen your resolve, or how do you continue today to just wade through all the nonsense and the BS? I mean, there's already guys in the chat calling your story BS. Like, what's next? Sovereign citizens, right? I mean, there's already that stuff, and we haven't even been live for half an hour. So, for people that may want to look into this, that are worried about familial pressure or societal ostracization or even government pressure, how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think with things like YouTube and Rumble, I get less vitriol than I once did, because um, anything somebody says to me, say, here's a link where I talk about this very issue. And I quote the law and I show the court cases. So if you think I'm a piece of crap for telling the truth, watch it. And if you don't care to watch it, then I don't give a shit what you have to say. If you want to remain ignorant and cast aspersions, why would I care? Um, but back in the early times, if we go back to, say, when I started my research, which was roughly 1993, um, there was like nobody who wanted to listen to this. Nobody. Okay. Um, the internet wasn't really a thing in 1993. It existed, but it wasn't useful really. Um, and so, all in all, I think this is important. If we use 1993 as my personal moment where things began to today, as you and I are talking, things have improved dramatically in terms of receptivity to the message. And I think also, sort of on an unrelated note, I think 2020, 21, and 22 also opened the door to more people being receptive because more people who perhaps thought the government was mostly credible had that blown out of the water by the COVID events and the actions that various governments took in this country, state and federal. So there's been a lot more receptivity since then. But how have I dealt with it? You know, if we go back to my military time and my time in law enforcement, um, I considered that I had contributed, that I had taken a stand for what I believed in. And of course, many of the things that I believed, for instance, when I went in the United States Army, turned out to be not true. Uh, I had a lot of illusions from the way I was raised, right? And then I didn't learn my lesson in the military and I went to law enforcement and so forth. But nevertheless, at that point in time, I still was motivated by the concept, and I still am today, by the way, that by the concept that government is our servant and we are the masters. And I felt that I had fought for that. I had bled for that. And so when I started to realize that what I was looking at was actually true, that the government had created a tax over here that does this, but had knowingly, willfully, and intentionally engaged in disinformation to convince 300 million people that it's actually this tax over here, something entirely different. They had knowingly, willfully, and intentionally done that in order to commit what I call in income tax shattering myths the largest financial crime in history, with us, the masters, as the victims. It was it was a done deal for me. I couldn't turn away. It's just not how I'm built. The government could have done anything to me. And in those first years, from 1993 through like 97, they tried. They tried everything in the book to shut me up. They tried everything they could do that was within their legal power to fuck me over. And I was just like, okay, keep it up. I'm still never going to file a 1040. I'm still going to never give you another penny. You can do whatever you want to do for the next 60 years of my life. You're never getting another 1040 and you're never getting any more of my money because you're fucking thieves. Period. Full stop. Go fuck yourself. And that was my mindset from the very moment I realized what I had been told was true from having done my own research. So it really didn't matter. I mean, obviously, it was unpleasant to have people make all sorts of false accusations, but in the big scheme of life, who cares?
Right. And again, doubling down, they came at you with everything they could legally. And a lot of people that
Mhm.
follow the work or that have read the book or that are interested in this kind of content, they're one of the most common things I hear is like, well, it doesn't matter what the law says because the IRS is just going to be corrupted. They're going to take you to court and judges are going to rule against you and you're going to be screwed. So good luck defending this in court. I'd rather just pay. I consider that the cost of doing business. And you're a guy that's been screaming for the rooftops for the last 30 years. And again, you never done a day of jail time, been convicted or accused of any sort of tax fraud or crime. So, I mean, if you're not the proof in the pudding, what is? So, I mean, that's, do you mind just very briefly chatting about, because again, it's brought up in the chat as it always is, because when your name comes up, first thing, it's not the book, it's not drreality.news, it's tax evasion specialist Dave Champion and his injunction. Can you just in like a 30-second snippet just tell people what that is and what that's not and what that means for you?
Okay, so the government attempted for many, many years to shut me down, to silence me. There was back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a very vibrant tax honesty community. And there were meetings across the country. Bob Schultz with We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education held a big shindig in Las Vegas for 3 days, and like 50 some odd of the top tax honesty researchers in the country attended, of which I was honored to be one of them. And they hoped to chart a course to wake the American public up and so forth. So this was a really vibrant movement. I was a part of that. I guess we'd call it, for lack of a better term, the leadership cast. I don't like that, because I think that the law and the research is the leader, not any individual.
Mm.
But nevertheless, and so the government had been trying to find a way to shut me up for years. And finally, what they did is they filed a suit for injunction in a federal court. And what they were trying to do was say that I could no longer help my fellow Americans exit the tax system. Okay. And their arguments were completely specious. And let me explain what I mean by that. There was an IRS employee who was attached to this unit that was there to shut me down. His IRS approved pseudonym was Thomas Chung. We know that's a pseudonym because in the court papers he filed, he said, "I'm filing this under my IRS approved pseudonym, Thomas Chung." And in that declaration to the court, he asserted that I said three things. Number one, that I said the term person in the US tax code does not include what the law calls a natural person, people like you and I, flesh and blood. Okay. That it only embraced what are called legal fictions. Okay. Corporations, partnerships, things like that. Did not embrace humans. The second thing they said is that I said paying income tax is voluntary. And the third thing I shouldn't say they, Thomas Chung in his declaration, I called Mr. No Name because we don't know what his real name is. So Mr. No Name, the third thing he said that I said, that wages as defined for the purpose of payroll withholding are not taxable. Okay. And it's so funny because when I got the paperwork, I was looking at it and I'm like, I have never said any of these things. And as a matter of fact, I have a video out. You can find it on my Rumble page. And I say to people, you don't need to find where I said all three of those things. If you can find anywhere at any time that I said even one of those things, I'll give you $50,000 in cash on the barrelhead. Okay. Because I never said them. And then, of course, um, we're there in Los Angeles in the federal district court. We're going through all the machinations of this process. And I told my attorney I never said any of those things. So, and here's where we talked about trying legal things. This was an illegal thing. Okay. So my attorney said to the judge, a corrupt motherfucker by the name of Percy Anderson. And by the way, I don't think most judges are corrupt. Percy Anderson is. Okay. So I want to be clear. The fact that I'm saying he's a corrupt motherfucker does not mean I'm branding all judges as being corrupt. So my attorney said, Your Honor, we would like to have an evidentiary hearing so we can depose Thomas Chung and find out. He says, Dave Champion, as an example, said that person does not include a natural person. So we want to know where Thomas Chung believes Dave Champion said that. Was it in a chat group? Was it in a document? Was it in some other form of writing? We need to know where that is because Chung, in his declaration, made what the law calls a naked assertion, no evidence. Okay. And it was no different than saying, I say Dave Champion is, I don't know, bank robber. Okay. You need evidence to back that up if you're going to make that claim, right? So he made these three naked assertions. So my attorney said, we want to have an evidentiary hearing so we can get the information behind that. And Judge Anderson denied that. Now, that's not just bad law. It's also a violation of the Constitution Because when the government makes an assertion, you have the right of due process. You have the right to say, okay, I need to see the proof of your naked assertion. What's behind the nakedness? Okay. That allows you to answer the claim that the government is making, right? Use the bank robbery example. You're going to claim I robbed a bank. You have to show evidence I robbed a bank. You can't just say it and then tell the jury they don't need any evidence. Okay. Which was what Judge Anderson did. But as I always explain to people about that, the government trying to take me to court to get an injunction, it is absolutely spectacular news for anybody who wants to know the truth about the income tax. Here's why. At the time that income tax shattering the myth, I'm sorry, at the time that they took me to court in an attempt to get this injunction, income tax shattering the myth was already out. And the Department of Justice Tax Division had already admitted they owned it. Okay. And everything that's worth saying, probably 95% of the information that's in my head about income tax is in income tax shattering the myths. And here they had income tax shattering the myths sitting right next to them on their desk. So they could have offered my views from income tax shattering the myths. They could have proved into evidence the exact things I really said. Instead, they didn't even bring up income tax shattering the myths, not once. They didn't offer a word from income tax shattering the myths in the courtroom. They did not try and enter any passages or any statements. And the reason is all of that is not my views. It's what the government said. You've read it, you know. Everything that's in there is what the government has said, not what I've said, right?
Right.
So why did they bring those three particular allegations, those false allegations up? They brought them up for one reason, and then I'll tell you my views on that. Number one, the primary reason is federal courts have adjudicated all three of those views to be false. Okay. And I agree. Those courts were absolutely right. This is what I mean by not all courts are correct. Okay. Corrupt, excuse me. All three of those positions are nonsense. They're ridiculous. So, but in order to influence the court, they needed to have it on the record. They needed to enter into the record that I had said things that previous federal courts had adjudicated to be false. So what they did is they made, and I think this is the important part that I would want your audience to take away. They had income tax shattering the myths sitting right there, 408 pages. They could have taken anything from there. They threw that away and they made shit up. The reason they made shit up is because what I say in income tax shattering the myths is the indisputable truth. They had to completely falsify. By the way, there was, and I've said this publicly many times, I'm going to say it again. There was a felonious conspiracy between the assistant U.S. attorney who was prosecuting the case, Judge Anderson, and Thomas Chung. The reason that the judge denied that motion for an evidentiary hearing to explore where Thomas Chung got those notions is it would have revealed Thomas Chung had committed a felony. And the fact that the judge knew that, and so he denied it, thus creating a constitutional violation, that telegraphs to me that he and the assistant U.S. attorney who was in charge of the case, they'd talked together outside the presence of the defense, my counsel, and said, look, it's just common sense the champion's attorney is going to ask for an evidentiary hearing. Your Honor, it is imperative that you not grant that. Because any rational judge would have said, yeah, of course, that's a matter of due process. Of course, you're entitled to an evidentiary hearing. Let's get that done. Okay. So there was multiple felonies committed in order to give the public the impression that I was spewing falsehoods.
So this has everything to do. The injunction has nothing to do with, hey, this guy hasn't paid taxes. This guy needs to file. Has nothing to do with that
Nope.
whatsoever. It has everything to do with, in layman's terms, somebody says, hey, you said these false things that previous courts have already determined is false. So therefore, we are going to assert that you made claims that you didn't, so we can sort of take you down. But I think,
Yeah.
Dave, I think this is sort of people that may be watching this and the people that bring that up, they're kind of like, well, this is case in point. The government, the IRS, will make up whatever they want to about you to throw the book at you. So what's sort of your response to that? It's like, hey, listen, most likely they're not going to come after you if you stay under the radar. I mean, is it because you were a public figure? Is it, people that's been the biggest thing people have come to me and said, hey man, I watched your first episode. And even if everything he says is true, the IRS and the government's corrupt. So it doesn't matter if I have the law on my side because they're just going to lie. So why even risk it?
Okay. Do you remember the Iranian hostage crisis?
Yeah, of course.
And everywhere that Americans went, there was these posters everywhere, and it was a picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and there was a rifle reticle
Hmm.
across his face. Okay, I lived in Southern California at the time, and this shit was posted everywhere. I very much imagine that starting probably about 95, 96, you could have walked into any of the offices, IRS enforcement offices, and you would have found a picture similar to that of me up on the wall.
Hmm.
Certainly, I was, I don't know where I would stand today, but certainly I was at that time. The FBI has their 10 most wanted list. I was certainly one of the 10 most wanted as far as the government's position on shutting me the hell up. Okay. And so I was a target. And I think we all know that the government treats people who are targets differently than they do the masses. Okay. So,
Sure.
as an example, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people have read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, but I do know from feedback I've gotten from people over the years that literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've read it have used that material to safely walk away from the income tax. So, how many of them have been accosted by the IRS? Well, if I were to judge that by the number of emails that I've received over the years saying, "Hey, I read Income Tax Shattering the Myths," as you mentioned, you read it 3 times. A lot of people that I know say the same thing to get every last little detail down. I read it 3 times. That's awesome. Now I got it. Okay, and then they safely exit the tax system. In the 15 years that Income Tax Shattering the Myths has been out, I have never received a single email from anybody saying, "Hey, I followed all of the law as you lay it out clearly, and now the IRS is kicking my ass or coming after me." I've never gotten that message. So, if 15 years, I've never received a single message like that. Now, to be clear, I do get messages from people saying, you know, I read your book, and in 2017, I stopped filing. The IRS is after me for 2013, 14, 15. Okay, but that's unrelated to the information they got from Income Tax Shattering the Myths. Um, so, and these people who raise these objections, I think some are sincere. I think a minority of them are sincere. I think a lot of them, it's just the way of covering their cowardice. The government, they're going to come after everybody. You can't fight City Hall. I'm telling you, you do this, you're getting fucked. You're going down. You're going to prison. All right, bitch. What do you say to that kind of cunt? It's just cowardice, and then they put this supposed facade of intellect in front of it. Oh, the system's corrupt. That's why I can't do what's right, because the system is to blame. Yeah, okay.
Sour grapes, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. Yeah, I mean, there's data out there. I mean, that shows how many cases are actually tried due to not filing, and it's minuscule, right? You're talking about in the hundreds.
Oh yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah,
if you're talking about,
in a nation of
of however
yeah,
50
in a
million,
nation of
however many,
334
300 million,
yeah, in a nation of 334 million Americans, they're not even publishing numbers anymore. That's how small it is. But
Mm.
when at the last year that they published numbers of prosecution, I think it was like 225 out of
Yeah,
334 million Americans. Your odds of getting struck by lightning several times are greater.
that's what I keep hearing. Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
astronomically
but
small.
but but be afraid, be a pussy.
Well, while we're on the subject, I want to throw, because he's always going to come up, and I want to make sure we're not going to do a comprehensive rundown of every single argument that's ever been brought up because we'd be here all day. But I think
True.
we do a quick little rundown of some of the more high profile cases and some of the guys that flew too close to the sun but did things wrong. Obviously, y'all throw a couple of the names at you, and in 30 to 60 seconds say, here's where they messed up, why this didn't work. Don't do what they did, right? First one is Irwin Schiff. How did that guy mess it up so badly?
Irwin Schiff. First of all, I loved Irwin. Okay, he was the grandpappy of the tax honesty movement, in my view, but he was wrong. He was mistaken. And for instance, he said there's no law anywhere that requires anyone to file an income tax return, and that's absolute nonsense. Um, and then, in his pursuance of being wrong, he encouraged other people not to file tax returns based on the premise, not that they weren't, not that the tax had not been imposed upon them. He didn't say that. He said there's no law anywhere in the tax code that requires anyone to file a tax return, which is manifestly nonsense, right? And so eventually, it's what is that? It's dangerous to be. Anyway, he was wrong, and the government decided, but he had a huge following. So he became, like we talked about earlier, for me, he became a target. But because he was wrong, another distinction that people should take stock of when considering reading Income Tax Shattering the Myths, because he was wrong, they went after him, convicted him, and put him in jail.
So he was incorrect on his main stance is everybody, no one is required to file, which is patently not true.
Correct.
Okay. How about Wesley Snipes? He always comes up.
Yeah. Wesley Snipes is an interesting case. He was following something called the 861 position. I have a chapter in my book called The Good, Bad, and the Mistaken, where I talk about positions that are either totally corrupt from day one, or they're just people are confused and mistaken. And 861 is a case of confused and mistaken. People thought that Section 861 of the code, and more specifically its regulations, were controlling concerning income tax, and they're not. Um, and so, actually, interesting story. I'll keep it short. After he'd been indicted, excuse me, Hollywood stars always have people. So his people reached out to me and they asked me to be on his defense team. And I said, sure, I would love to. I said, the thing that I would love most now that an indictment has been handed up is to have the government dismiss all the charges. What would that say, right? I said, but and we can do that. We can make that happen. But we have to threaten to bring into court the real law, not this 861 nonsense. So if you're willing to give up 861 and defend Wesley Snipes based on the law, I'm all in. We'll make it happen. The government will not, they will ask the court to dismiss. They will not take him to trial because they cannot afford to have the information entered into the public record. And they said, nope, 861 is this is, if not a quote, damn close. 861 is the hill Wesley Snipes is prepared to die on.
And he did.
I said, okay, guys. Right. We know how the story ended, but I was like,
Right.
okay, then I can't be on your team. I'm not going to help. I'm not going to help use a bogus argument. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Basically, they're applying the wrong. There was another one we brought up, and we talked briefly backstage, and I'm not as super well versed on this one, but another one was US v. Tedder. This was a 1983 case where he, I think he represented himself for one, and then the multiple arguments that he made were all specious. There was he claimed I think brought against him, he claimed exempt on a W-4, which they said that's unknowing lits, that's committing fraud. Can you chat about that court case just a little bit and maybe what are some of the mistakes he made in his filings?
So I can only speak sort of in an overview sense because I don't like have the notes with me on the Tedder
Sure.
case. Um, uh, because the reason I say I don't have my notes is he made so many different arguments. I think it was like 13 different arguments he made at various points in at trial. And every single one of them was specious. There was, I mean, and to his credit, I guess, some of them were like really novel arguments, like the uh, certain aspects of how the government publishes requirements for certain
Right.
forms misled him, and therefore he was innocent because he was misled. Da, 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 which was kind of a novel argument, and I sort of appreciated the novelty of it. But ultimately, none of them would stand the test of legal challenge, and they didn't. And if at any time you wanted to do a show on tenor, I would be willing to
Yeah, it probably
sit
needs
with
its
you
own
and
show.
your audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how many crazy arguments he made, and of course he got convicted,
Right.
and his appeal was rejected.
Right. I thought I saw one in there that one of his appellate points was, well, I sent a letter to the IRS asking them if I was required to file, and they never got back to me, and so therefore not guilty. It was something like that. It was just something so wild.
That was one of the
Yeah.
arguments. Absolutely,
Right.
it's like so. So if I write to the agency and the agency doesn't write back, then that his
Checkmate.
his
Yeah.
position. Well, it seemed to be what he was saying is, if you don't get back to me, that ameliorates all the statutes, all the
Right.
regulations, all the treasury decisions, all the law is ameliorated because you didn't write me back. How does that work?
Yeah. Yes, because someone said that to me, and I looked at it, and I had the exact same contention. I said, none of these arguments hold water in any shape, form, or fashion. They're speeches. They're crazy. This dude's nuts.
Yeah,
And it was over like a small amount of money. It was like, well, back then, 20K was not, a small amount, but I mean, this is 50 years
right.
ago. But I digress. So the last thing I kind of have here, a couple things, and then we're gonna do a little bit of questions. So guys, if you have questions, if you want to call in, the call in link is pinned to the top of the chat. We're gonna kind of go over the reason I brought on Dave in the first place is because he put out a video about a week or so ago about the Supreme Court decision, Moore v. US, that was decided back this past June, and there's going to be some legal jargon. So Dave, take us there, and guys, try to keep up as much as possible. But and we'll link your Rumble video to the description after this as well, so people can go and watch that. But kind of in your own words and in your own terms, explain to the people why this decision is so monumental, what it does, what it says, what it affirms, and sort of just give us your 30,000-foot view on why it's important, what does it say, and then where do we kind of go from here?
Okay, so it's Moore et Oaks v. The hell is the United States. Okay, so and that's et Oaks is capital ET space capital UX if your audience wants to look it up. Moore et X v. United States. Okay,
I'll put the PDF
sorry,
in the description afterwards too. Yeah.
my thoughts are spieling along here. Okay, so the big thing about the case that's covered in the media was the fact that the United States Supreme Court said if you are a shareholder, you're American, you're a resident or a citizen of this country, and you're a shareholder in a foreign corporation, the government can tax your unrealized gains for your shares in the foreign corporation. That was splashed all over the media. But here's the words from page 2 of the decision. Here's the words that we want to focus on today. Taxes on income are indirect taxes, and the 16th Amendment confirms that taxes on income need not be apportioned. Okay, so again, I'm going to try and burn through this quickly. So all of this is explained, by the way, in Income Tax Shattering the Myths. What the court said here in Moore, the court said back in 1916 in Bruce Shaber. So it's a restatement, almost 100, well, more than 100 years later, of what the court said in Bruce Shaber, and I'm thrilled that the Supreme Court said it in 2024. So, in the Constitution, the government, the federal government, is allowed to impose two forms of taxation: a direct tax and an indirect tax. So, a direct tax is a tax upon, I guess, the court said persons or property, but I'm going to say upon the exercise of a right. That's a direct tax. Okay. And I think it's enough for the purpose of this show to say, I'm going to say it now, and the court also said it in the decision. Congress has never imposed a direct tax in the entire history of the United States. So, because Congress has never done that, we can take that and move it right off the agenda. We don't need to talk about that. That leaves the other category of an indirect tax. Now, according to the Constitution, there are three forms of indirect tax: imposts, duties, and excises. So, The in Bruce Shaber, the Supreme Court said the income tax is an excise tax. Okay? So you got to keep in mind indirect tax, and then there are three versions down here, of which the Supreme Court has said that the particular flavor of income tax is an excise. Okay, so excise is an indirect. So what's an excise tax? Well, according to the federal courts, an excise tax is synonymous with a privilege tax. Say it has the same meaning. When you say excise tax, you mean it's a tax upon the exercise of a privilege. And by the way, that means a government granted privilege. So we have the Supreme Court in 2024 saying taxes on income are indirect taxes, impost duties, excises, and the court has already said they're an excise. And the courts have already said an excise is a privilege tax. So let's take the guy who goes to work and I don't know, say he's a welder, okay, American citizen, goes in, he spends his day welding things up, and he gets paid. He uses that money to sustain himself and his family. Where is the government granted privilege? Yeah. Because the Supreme Court in June of 2024 just said there has to be a government privilege. Okay. Um, Now, it's not any government privilege because somebody might, one of your listeners, your viewers might say something like, "Well, I'm an interstate trucker and I have a federal license for that, so that's a government granted privilege." No, 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 no. It's not any privilege. It's it's only the privilege specified in the tax code. Okay. Subtitle A, excuse me. So,
An example of that, Dave, would be like selling alcohol or tobacco or controlled substances. Like, what's an
yes.
example of a government granted privilege?
Well, you just mentioned it: distilling alcohol, distributing alcohol. Um, Importing goods into the United States. Okay, the tariffs are a form of taxation, and the court said about indirect taxes that they are upon an activity. And one of the other things the court said about in the Brushaber court, not the Moore court, the Brushaber court said that an indirect tax lacks the absolute requirement to pay. Okay, what the court meant by that, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if I have it in my notes here. No, I don't. Sorry, but that's essentially what the court said: that there's an unavoidable demand for payment. What the court meant by that is for these excise taxes, for these indirect taxes, if you don't want to pay the tax, don't engage in the activity. So if you don't want to pay the tax on distilling spirits, don't distill spirits. You don't want to pay the tariff on importing goods into the United States. Don't import goods into the United States. However, anything that you would have to do for your survival, okay, that allows you to eat and breathe and be sheltered, and have clothing, these are all things that to tax that would be a direct tax. Now, here's an interesting point that flows from both Bruce Shaber in 1916 and Moore in 2024. And that is, and this is specifically stated in Bruce Shaber. Now, here's the concept. I go out and do whatever. Let's say my neighbor wants a ditch dug, but he's old and unhealthy and can't do it. So he says, "Dave, will you dig this ditch across my property?" And I say, "Sure." And he says, "How much do you want?" I say, "I'll charge you $1,000." He says, "Good deal." So I go out there and I labor and I dig this ditch across this thing. And at the end, he gives me $1,000. Now I gave him something, yes? He has a ditch, which he and I both valued at $1,000. Okay. So he's got $1,000 ditch and I've got $1,000 in Federal Reserve notes. So was there profit or gain, or was there an equal exchange? Okay. Nevertheless, that point aside, when I take that money he hands me and I walk away and I sit down in my car, what I'm holding in my hands is my property. And remember, the court said that a direct tax, the one that's never been imposed in this country's history, is on property. So for somebody to say we're taxing your income, that would become a direct tax, requiring apportionment throughout the 50 states, okay, as per the Constitution. So we know right there and then, anybody who's rational, logical, they know right then and there the tax is not upon the income. The tax is upon the exercise of a privilege, and the amount of income that a taxpayer, which we know who that is now, right, from earlier in the conversation, the amount of income the taxpayer received is used as a yardstick, as a gauge to determine the value that that taxpayer received from exercising the privilege. In the case of the income tax, unlike distilling spirits, which was an earlier example, in reference to the income tax, the privilege was receiving U.S. source income to a non-resident alien or foreign corporation. Okay. That is the privilege. And so the person who exercises the privilege, and at the end of the year they have $1 million in revenue from that, is going to pay more in tax than the person who exercises the exact same privilege and earns $250,000. Because the guy with $1 million in revenue, the privilege was worth more, and so the government imposes more of a tax. The rate remains the same, but because he has more, well, more or less the same, but because he has more revenue, he has to pay more tax.
Got it.
But it is still, the tax is still upon the exercise of the privilege, not upon the income. And that's a crucial thing to understand.
And working in the United States, earning a living for your own survival, owning property, those are inherent rights. Those are not a privilege that the government grants upon you. The reason it's a privilege for a
Exactly.
non-resident alien, because you don't have a right to be here. You don't have a right to make money here. That's something that's granted to you because of your non-natural born citizen status, essentially.
Correct.
Okay. Now, how does that apply? So if I have a right to own property, and this is kind of a two-parter, but we live in the age of crypto. A lot of guys are into Bitcoin and they're worried about their capital gains at the end of the year. And as far as I understood it, and I think that was kind of mentioned by you, is that even a profit, even if I make a profit, that's a right, right? That's my property. Can you kind of distill that down for guys that maybe have sort of these, bags of crypto and they're worried about having to report that every single year? What does that kind of look like in terms of, this is my property and a profit is still mine to hold and own?
Okay, so we'll come back around to crypto, but I want to use an example everybody can
Okay.
relate to, and that would be real property. So let's say a person goes out and they buy a piece of real property and they pay $400,000 for the piece of real property. They sit on it for several years and now it's appraised at $800,000. So they decide, okay, they sell the property, boom. So now they have $800,000. So here's the way this works. For somebody like me, who knows what the law says, who knows that I'm not a person upon whom Congress has imposed a tax, I invested $400,000 of my property into another form of property. Then, after several years, I sold that form of property for $800,000 of my property. Okay. So, because the tax code, subtitle A, has no bearing on me, all I have is $400,000 in profit. Now, for the American who's brainwashed and thinks that he owes the income tax, he doesn't have $400,000 in property, additional property. He has $400,000 in something called capital gains. Okay. Um, and capital gains, as you know, are taxed differently. So it's really a question of knowledge. It's as simple as that. For somebody like me, there are no capital gains. And the same principle applies to crypto. There's nothing about crypto that changes the I'm sorry, I'm not the lingo that's used in the crypto world. I'm not familiar with that. So what is it called? Your wallet? What you got in your wallet?
Your
Is that how
wallet,
it's
or
phrased?
yeah, sure. Like an exchange, I go to an exchange like Coinbase and I buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. And now that Bitcoin, it transfers from my debit card or my bank account. And now on that exchange, it shows my portfolio essentially $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, and the value will
Okay,
fluctuate as Bitcoin rises and falls. But essentially, I've paid
sure.
for with U.S. cash $1,000 worth of Bitcoin.
Right. So that $1,000 worth of Bitcoin is your property. And as it appreciates, just like the real estate we talked about, as it appreciates, you simply have more property. So should somebody choose to cash out, we'll use your $1,000 example. Let's say they're up to $10,000. So they choose to cash out. For somebody like me, it would be $9,000 more property. I used my brain. I was intelligent. There, of course, with crypto, there's some timing and luck and so forth, right? But I chose my investment wisely. So it would seem I have $9,000 in additional property. Period. Full stop. For the person who doesn't read, as an example, income tax shattering myths, who doesn't do any research, who doesn't read the law, that person is going to think they owe 9,000, that they have $9,000 in capital gain on which to pay capital gains tax. That's how they're going to see it, because they don't understand that. And I should say, we talk about subtitle A, the income tax that's been imposed on foreign persons with U.S. source income. People right now who are in crypto may be thinking, yeah, but what about this other thing? And I literally have a video I put out called The Doctrine of Missing Parts. And that's where people who want to defend the income tax system as their brainwashed brain perceives it, they will say there's something else somewhere else. And then when you say, oh, great, maybe I'm human, maybe I made a mistake. Come on, show it to me. Where is that something else? They're like, go fuck yourself. They don't know. And it's sort of the same way I think with people with like crypto, when I say it's not an increased subject to capital gains, it's just your property. I think it's hard for a lot of people to say that's true. That makes sense. Because they think there's got to be something else somewhere else, but there isn't. And by the way, when I say this somewhere, something else somewhere else, I have talked to everyone from um, people in payroll department concerning payroll withholding, people in HR, CFOs, COOs, CEOs, tax attorneys, you name it. I have talked to them for the last 30 years about this. And 99% of them say, well, there's got to be something else somewhere else over a 30-year period. And when I say to them, great, what is it and where can I find it? They have nothing to say. There is nothing else, nowhere else. So for the people in crypto, I would say read Income Tax Shattering the Myths and conduct yourself appropriately. Now, let's talk about a tangential issue, if you don't mind. I know you're the
Sure.
host, you're supposed to be setting the
Oh,
pace, but
please.
um, there a lot of these exchanges, they want you to sign forms W-9, they want to provide taxpayer numbers. And there are ways to address that, and you do not want to just do that and leave that hanging. So, for instance, let's say an exchange says, we need you to file this form, to sign this form W-9 with us. Okay. So I'm going to guess the vast majority of your audience thinks that a form W-9 is simply the way it's done. If I'm doing business with company A and company A wants to pay me some money, they're going to say, we need a W-9 so we can pay you that money. But they've never actually gone and read anything about what Form W-9 means in law. It's just sort of this socialized thing. Oh, they're going to pay me? I need to fill out a W-9. Okay. So here's what a Form W-9 really means. The person who puts their name at the top, puts their taxpayer identification number, and signs it under penalty of perjury. What they're swearing to under penalty of perjury is that they are an American citizen or resident, and the payment that they have received or are going to receive is U.S. source income belonging to a foreign person. That is to what they are attesting when they sign that. And I'm going to guess, you can line up 100,000 Americans and not one of them would know that. It's just the way it's done. So obviously, since we talked about the tax has been imposed upon foreign persons with U.S. source income. And we talked about that the domestic agent, the otherwise known in tax law as a U.S. person, has to deduct and withhold the tax before they send the money on to the foreigner. You don't want to leave a legal presumption to which you have sworn under penalty of perjury that the money you received isn't really yours. It's the foreign guys. So, yeah, there are ways to cope with that, to deal with that, and that'd be way too lengthy to get into here.
Sure.
But going back to the main point that you asked about, it's just your property. It's not capital gains. Just get an education, you'll know it.
Good stuff. Guys, I'm going to run the ad real quick. Guys that have questions want to call in, come in the backstage here. We've got one person already waiting. I don't see any super chats. I'll try to go back through, and I know there was a question in here about lock-in letters and tactics the IRS sort of use for your scare tactics. But I'm going to run the ad really quick. We'll be back in about a minute and a half. So click the link at the top of the chat if you want to come in. If you have a question, if you have a disagreement, I know you guys are kind of arguing with each other in the chat, but if you want to ask Dave directly, feel free to come backstage. All right, let's get on with the show. So we got a couple guys here backstage. Again, if you guys want to ask questions, I'm just going to go and bring folks up in the order they popped back. So we have, and most of you guys are muted, so you'll have to come off mute when we bring you up. But we have Kushagra. You're live. Just need you to come off mute so you can ask your question. Going once, going twice. Got to come off mute. There we go.
Hello. Am I audible?
Hey, man. You got a question?
Yeah. Hello. Am I audible?
Sorry, say that again.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I just have one question. It's a pretty basic question.
Okay.
It's that like when you say income tax, like I live in India, and the thing is the taxes here are pretty high. So what other investable options available for people like us, offshore accounts and stuff like that would allow me to save more money?
Well, this is about the U.S. federal income tax. So, this is not about giving financial advice or anything like that. This is, if you're a U.S. citizen or you're living in the U.S., this is about the U.S. income tax. So, if you have any questions around that, then great. But
all right. So if let's say I already have an account in the United States and
okay,
I wish to manage my taxes in a way that manage my finances in a way to avoid taxes. So what are some of the steps that I can take to reduce that? Like trust funds and stuff like that. I've read about it, but I'm a bit scared to follow up on that.
Dave, do you want to take
so,
that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Provided that the work you do takes place in the United States, you are a taxpayer. There's no way around that. So, when a taxpayer asks me about ways to minimize their tax obligation, my advice is to speak to a talented financial advisor or a certified public accountant. I am not the person who is qualified, frankly, to answer questions about how a person who is a taxpayer, all the various mechanisms that can be used to reduce a legitimate taxpayer's tax burden. I'm not the guy for that.
All right. Okay, that's the only question I had. Thank you for addressing it.
Thanks, man. No worries. Yeah. All right, let's bring up friend of the program, Algo Cowboy. You're on live. How we doing, man?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good, brother. What's your question?
Well, Dave, been listening to a few of your recent shows and really like the work. Now, my question's around kind of similar to what you were just talking about with cryptocurrencies, Coinbase in particular, or even if you're doing stocks, those brokerages, they will send a 1099. They'll send those out to you. So when you receive a 1099, what do you do with that as far as like, do you ignore it? I mean, I would never advise anything. No. I don't know anything about this stuff. I'm like, I'm just saying, like, how do you like convince whoever that that's property and not income?
Okay, so first of all, this goes back. Was your name Al? Did I get that correct?
No, you call me Nick. That's my name.
Okay,
Yeah,
Nick.
I'd
Sorry, I
normally be on
misunderstood.
camera. Just my office is a mess right now.
Okay, no problem. All right, Nick. So I hinted about this a few moments ago when we talked about the Form W-9, and because the way the regulatory flow works is a company will request that you execute a Form W-9, or they will have an embedded Form W-9 in their software when you sign up. And so that W-9 in whatever form it takes, that Form W-9 then green lights them to furnish the 1099. So, from the government's point of view, that 1099 says when they get it with Nick's name on it at the end of the year, what it says to them is their presumption is Nick executed a Form W-9 under penalty of perjury. So, what Nick said to the exchange, if we're using crypto as the example, what Nick certified to the exchange under penalty of perjury is that this isn't really Nick's money. This is actually money belonging to a foreign person, US source income belonging to a foreign person. And so, therefore, Nick needs to show that he pushed the money to another domestic agent, or Nick needs to withhold the US income tax and pay it over to the government. That's what the 1099 symbolizes to the government. So no, you don't want to leave that legal presumption in place. You definitely want to um, lay what I call the evidentiary record, and that involves reaching out to the company when they request a W. Now, there's a whole complex. If I can help you with that, shoot me an email at david.reality.news. But you do not want to leave it unresponded to, unrebutted is the answer. But that process begins with the initial request for your taxpayer identification number. It doesn't just begin at the point where the 1099 arrives in your mailbox.
Sure. So just to make this simple, essentially a W-9 is, if you sign that, you're essentially saying that's like foreign money or money from a foreign person. So when
No. Let me correct that. U.S. source income belonging to a foreign person.
Got you. Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Because it
Okay.
might be, I'm not a foreign person. So that's pretty much what you're going to have to, you'll have some, volleys back and forth explaining basically that you're not a foreign person. Am I assuming that properly?
Yes, and if I may tell you a story, something that happened recently, and I think it'll highlight what's going on here. So I've got a friend of mine on the East Coast, and he's very big into real estate, and he's got multiple licenses concerning brokerage and real estate stuff. So he went because he has these licenses. He went to that thing that a lot of licensees have to go to now, which is annual continuing education. So he went to one of these, and the guest speaker part of this was somebody from one of the biggest real estate conglomerates in the United States. And he was talking about, oh, what's the acronym for that form? FERPA? FERPA? I forget. Anyway, um, but this form was created by the very top companies in the real estate industry. And now, oh, FACTA? Anyway, so
Facta,
we're
yeah,
going to call
that's
it.
Facta.
Okay. So now everybody in the real estate, if you're buying, selling, doing anything in real estate, you have to sign this FACTA form, which says you are not a foreign person. So someone in the crowd raised their hand and said to the guest speaker, considering like 99% of our business is Americans, why are we having everybody sign this FACTA form? And the guy said, because the way the US government looks at it, is everyone is a foreign person until they certify otherwise. Pretty shocking,
Interesting.
is it not? Yes.
Guilty
So that's
until
the
proven
same,
innocent.
correct. And that's the same thing that's going on with the crypto exchanges. It's the same thing that's going on when, Tim, the guy who cleans carpets for businesses at night, when they want to cut him a check, they say, hey, we need you to sign this W-9. It is that this dynamic in the United States where everybody has to certify that they're not foreign. But the problem is, it's that part where, like, okay, so I'm not a foreign person, I don't have to sign this. That part is missing from the minds of the people who are making the demand for the W-9. So I don't have, for instance, if somebody said to me, hey, Dave, I need to pay you that money, shoot me a W-9. I have no objection to that request. So when I say, hey, Bob, that's cool that you want the W-9, but not for me. That's not a correct form for me in law. I would be certifying under penalty of perjury, something I know to be false. I know you don't want me to commit perjury. Well, then I'm not going to be able to pay you. Oh, so now you are suborning perjury, which is a federal offense, a felony, right? So if he simply said, "Oh, I didn't," you're not that guy. Okay, never mind. I now that you've told me I don't need it, you're not the guy. I don't need it then. I'd be like, okay, cool. I think you would too be. You'd also be cool, Nick. The problem is Bob would say to me, "Listen here, Dave. I'm not really asking. I asked for it, but I'm not really asking. You better give that to me. If you don't give that to me, I'm not going to pay you, or I'm going to back up withhold. Oh, I need that form." And if we end up in an argument, perhaps, if you got somebody who's out there trying to make a living for their family, then their customers or their clients may say, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't do business with you anymore." So much like with the crypto exchanges, when somebody says it's our way or the highway, you still need to be able to um, respond to that and create the evidentiary record showing that they disregarded the law. And there are some ways to do that.
Interesting. Okay. Shoot, I thought. Oh, yes. And with an LLC purchasing items, things like that, do they even require W-9s? I've had my LLC open up some accounts. I just haven't been using them. But are there different rules for LLCs than like a natural person in that regard?
Thank you for the in that regard part. Typically, LLCs, I'm sorry, financial institutions and many other entities consider an LLC to be the same as an individual. And the reason for that is they don't know whether it's a single member LLC or what the status is. So they just consider it the same as an individual. They do treat C Corps very differently, but LLCs they generally treat just like they would treat me or you.
I see. My LLCs are all multi-member LLCs, so I'm not a disregarded entity. So if that being the case, that provides a little bit of protection. In with that being the case, multi-member LLC, not a natural person. I imagine they don't know that unless you tell them that, so they're probably going to proceed as if the LLC is a natural person. In any case, is there a different process to rebut any W-9 that comes your way as a multi-member LLC?
No, because the W-9 doesn't change what it symbolizes in law, whether it's me filling it out or your multi-level LLC filling it out. It's still a declaration under penalty of perjury that the income you're receiving is U.S. source income that belongs to a foreign person, and the LLC is acting as the domestic agent for the foreign person.
Got you. Okay, understood. That makes sense to me, and I know a little of these things, so that's why it kind of makes sense. But feel free to elaborate for anybody else, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Anything else?
No, not for me. Thank you.
All right, right on, dude. We'll talk soon. Later. All right. We had somebody that was going to try to come on, but it shows your microphone and your video is not connected. So you're just hanging out backstage. We had one person that dropped off, but while we're waiting to see if anybody's going to pop backstage, Dave, I do want to bring up this question that we got really early on. Question for Dave: what advice would you give for IRS lock-in letters? The IRS can arbitrarily send one to try to scare your employer into withholding federal income tax as a last resort.
Okay, so what's missing from that is lock-in letters come when somebody's gone exempt on their W-4. They don't just arbitrarily send lock-in letters. And there's a whole dynamic that goes with this. So a lot of people who learn the truth of the income tax but don't understand the forms side of it well enough, they think that the solution to not paying income tax anymore, not filing 1040s, is to go exempt on the W-4. So exempt, and you've read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, so you know that words used by the government concerning income tax frequently don't mean what the American public believes they mean. And exempt is one such example. If you lined up 100 Americans and said, what does it mean to say you're exempt from the income tax? They would say, oh, well, you don't owe it. Okay. So that's not at all what exempt means on a Form W-4. Exempt on a Form W-4 means the following. Because remember, the Form W-4, this is going to blow the minds of some of your audience, is also for a non-resident alien receiving U.S. source income. It has nothing to do with Joe Blow, working as an auto mechanic at a big shop. It doesn't have anything to do with Susie, who's a receptionist at the dental office. Nothing. It is for non-resident aliens with U.S. source income. So exempt, when you sign a W-4 under penalty of perjury, you're raising your hand and saying, I am a non-resident alien with U.S. source income. Please withhold from me. Okay. So with that in mind, when the government sees the signature at the bottom, exempt doesn't mean you don't owe the tax because you just declared under penalty of perjury, you do. So exempt is a technical classification. So as an example, let's say a non-resident alien overpaid his income tax last year. So the IRS allows him to not have payroll withholding done for a period of time until he breaks even on his overpayment from the year before. Yeah. So exempt means you don't have to pay. You do owe income tax. You are a person upon whom it's been imposed. That's number one. Number two, there is a technical reason that number three, you don't have to have withholding done right now. Okay. So what happens is oftentimes after somebody's gone exempt for a period of time, the government will say, no. So what they'll do is they'll send this lock-in letter. It's also called a single zero letter. And what it tells the company is dishonor the existing W-4. It's no longer valid. And we're saying you now have to withhold at single zero, which is the highest amount of withholding that can be done. And more importantly, or in addition, you're not allowed to take another W-4 from that guy until we say so. So it's single zero until we say otherwise. Okay. And in cases like that, well, first of all, the solution is not to go exempt. Okay, number one, because the lock-in letter only comes in response to going exempt. Secondly, it's dependent on whether the employer is just a drone. I mean, if they are, they're going to say, I'm sorry, we have to do this. But there's no requirement for them to adhere to that, I should say. By the way, just not that my saying this is going to influence companies that receive the lock-in letter, but they're under no obligation to do that. They can just continue to do whatever they've been doing with the employee. And there is no consequence for the company in ignoring a lock-in letter. Interesting side note on that. The Treasury Department has a list of every single document that it produces that goes out to the public, and it's a catalog, and it shows in their official catalog, it shows what the document has been approved for. And Chris, you and I know that, for instance, like the W-9 is a perfect example. It doesn't tell you what it's really for, because if it said on the document in law, here's what you're attesting to, no one would sign it, right? So the same thing is true with the lock-in letter. When you look at the catalog, you look at that letter number, and you see what every document is approved by the Treasury Department legal department. Okay. And it lists its purpose, what the attorneys at Treasury have approved it to be used for. And the sole thing that the attorneys have approved the lock-in letter for is it says, instructs an employer to withhold at other than single zero. But the IRS changes the language on the face of it and says, now you must withhold at single zero. But that's not the that's not the use for which the Treasury attorneys approved it. It's part of the scam.
Got it. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I know that we talked before about, if a company's forcing you to sign a W-4, you can sign it under duress, or ideally you don't submit it at all. But some folks say it's just the cost of doing business and you kind of worry about it after the fact. But I know you're not of that school. So
No.
is that the right way to go
Again,
about it, is to sign it under duress?
Well, again, that's part of a whole process, creating what I refer to as the evidentiary record. And that's more than we can probably get into here. But yeah, it's essential to make sure that the communications from both sides, and the communications have to be legally factual and accurate. They have to be properly stated, and that you memorialize in your evidentiary record every step of the way. Okay, that's what protects you down the road. So people just say, "Oh, it's the cost of doing business. I'll sign it and deal with it later." No, 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 no. Because when later comes, you don't have any evidence. What it looks like to the government is you signed it because you believed it. You signed it because you believe you're a person who owes the income tax. You signed it because you're a person under penalty of perjury, because you're a person who believes that withholding must be done from you. And then at that point, the government says, "We believe you."
Right.
You said it under penalty of perjury. Interesting short story. Back in the 90s, there was this big thing where people would send letters off to the IRS and they would say, "Please show me the law that makes me liable for the income tax," right? Not it's some other guy makes me liable for the income tax. And the IRS no longer does this, but for several years, the IRS would send a letter back saying, "We've received your request. Please see the attached document." And when you turn the page over, it was your previously filed 1040. Okay. So really what the government was saying is, why are you asking us to show you why you're liable? You certified under penalty of perjury to us that you're liable. We're just taking you at your word. What's your problem? Which is kind of a comical
Yeah.
response from the IRS. But it shows how while it's humorous in a sense, it does show how the IRS operates off the things you signed and the presumptions that those signatures raise, and why it is so important to effectively and incrementally, as things progress in your business world, to effectively rebut those things and build an evidentiary record.
And so it's essentially, it's not enough just to say, "Hey, I'm not going to sign a 1040. I need to rid myself of all forms that could be considered under penalty of perjury that I am somebody that upon which the income tax has applied." I mean, that's a lead into this question. It's like, okay, let's say I'm a self-employed, I'm a business owner, and I'm utilizing, third-party payment platforms, Stripe or Venmo or PayPal or one of these, and that's how I conduct my business. So some of these apps may have built-in W-9s. I mean, if I've ever given a TIN or an SSN, what sort of checks do I need to do if I've done this? Do I need to go back and, review under the TS terms and service, whether I've unknowingly signed one, kind of check that. And let's say I have, and I've received money through one of these exchanges. What's the next step in building that, evidentiary record?
Okay. So if you're opening an account with any business that could reasonably be construed as a financial institution, which I'm using that in a very, very broad sense. Okay.
Sure.
And one way to look at it would be if money is flowing from you to others through that mechanism, or from others to you through that mechanism. For the purpose of this discussion, we'll call it a financial institution. If that's the case, they consider that you did execute a Form W-9.
Okay.
Now, it may just have been that you're online and you're signing up on your phone for, say, a stock trading account, right? And you're doing this, and it gets to the point where it requests your social security number. Okay, well, it's really requesting your taxpayer identification number. And what happens is, in that company's software, the number you enter in drops into the taxpayer identification box. It drops into the W-9 box, even if that information is not presented to you as such. So if it says, "Please enter your taxpayer identification number," and it does not disclose this serves as a Form W-9, by clicking this box, you are certifying this and such is true concerning the W-9. Even if that's not there, which it obviously should be legally, but even if that's not there, their software drops the number that you enter into the field, drops it into the W-9 box on their back end. Okay. So yes, there's a whole process that needs to take place to effectively and correctly rebut the presumptions that those moments raise.
Got it. So there's always a process, and there's a process even with that. Like I said, it's not as simple as saying, "Hey, I'm not going to file a 1040. I'll take money through some of these exchanges." And that's wild that they can present just by filling out an SSN. They say, "Oh, well, that's even though we don't give you a W-9, even though we don't have it any fine print saying you're basically signing a W-9 because of this, you are giving us that information, and therefore, you fall under this category of being a taxpayer." So that I'm sure a lot, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs that watch our stuff, and there's only so many payment gateways out there in the world unless you create your own. But
Right.
these gigantic third party companies that are taking your money. So that's something else for these guys to look out for if you're doing business outside of W-2 and you're an independent contractor, you run your own business. If you're not opening, because I know guys that just say, "Hey, look, like I'm not going to bother with a business bank account. I'm not going to open an LLC. I'm just going to take payments through these third parties, and friends and family is, because there's an option on some of these pay, like, oh, if it's PayPal, it's friends and family. It's not for a product or service. So that's a way to kind of get around that. So I'm sure there's more digging that needs to be done on that end.
Well, people oftentimes they'll drop me an email before they purchase Income Tax Shattering the Myths, and they want to know. They ask a question which telegraphs that what they're really asking is Income Tax Shattering the Myths a guide to how to leave the
How
income
to,
tax behind?
yeah,
And I think you would agree, all the information is in there for a person with an entrepreneurial spirit and some intelligence. All the tools are in there for them to walk away intelligently. But that's different than being confident about the exact mechanisms. Okay. And
right,
I think that's a challenge to a lot, an understandable challenge to a lot of people. So like what are in a world where everybody else has not read the law, everybody else is a dumb fuck, what mechanism, what are the mechanisms that I can use to protect myself? I get that that's a challenge. And, if I can help somebody, drop me an email, dave@drreality.news.
very good. Well, Dave, I'm looking at the questions. We don't have anybody else backstage. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Really quick.
Okay. So
Let's,
I want to say
yeah,
something to your
please.
audience.
Yeah, please do.
I know, I know your audience has more questions.
Yeah,
I
of course.
go ahead and ask them. I will be kind. I promise. Don't, don't miss this opportunity. Um, if you got the questions, now is the time. Because I experience this a lot on interviews
Right.
that people get, I don't know, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but don't be intimidated. Ask the question. I'll give you the answer as straight as I know how to give it to you, without
Well, there's a
judgment.
lot of folks that like to sit in the comments and spew this and that. I mean, there's one guy in here that's typing in all caps, just been going nuts for the last hour. And we get this gentleman that keeps trying to call in. But so if you can hear me, if you guys are understood, like when you come back into the StreamYard, you have to enable your camera and video. Otherwise, I cannot bring you on stage. So we have someone that keeps coming back into the backstage. You have to enable your camera and microphone access to get access to the stage. So hopefully you're listening to this.
I want Mr. All Caps to call.
I would love him to. I mean, like
Yeah.
he's saying you're not certified, and this is all
And th-
BS. Joe Biden says $600 for PayPal. I mean, he's going back. I'm here. Say, look, I'm here to refute. Well, come up. Please say something, or please put in a question. I mean, I don't know if he will call in though, but we go through this quite often where we've got guys that disagree. Like as soon as the show is over, the comments will be full of this guy's a fraud, this is BS, but they won't, kind of call in and share that
oh,
and go toe to toe and live in real time. So it's something we're definitely used to on this channel.
yeah. Home of the brave.
Yeah, indeed. So, but yeah, guys, I mean, look, like call in if you got questions. I'm going to kind of go through here and see if there's anything else that we're sort of missing here. Give you guys another, couple of minutes to go ahead and submit some questions. But I know that Nick wanted to ask that. I know he was asking about, through certain brokerages and things like that. So I know he wanted to ask that question. Yeah, like here's the thing, like ask Dave is a profession. You have a professional credential, like whatever that might mean. So I'm not sure. I mean, you've read the law. Like that's what I always tell folks. It's there for you to read too.
And I've read it for 30 years.
Right.
Yeah. You could, and that question is just so odd because it's like, so yes, the government offers a credential to people who say the government's full of shit and they've been spreading disinformation for 60 years. Yes, there's a government certificate for that. What?
I know. Like, Kane, call into the show, man. You don't need to email us. Please just call it if you want to come in and like, I don't know, state your claim, man. I would love to hear what you had to say. We got our guy that finally got his video set up. But go ahead, quick, Dave.
So while we're waiting, I'll give you an example. When I first wrote Income Tax Shattering the Myths, we were aware of 8 Treasury decisions saying that a 1040 is to be used only by non-resident aliens with a U.S. source income or the non-resident alien's domestic agent. So now, here in 2024, we have 11 Treasury decisions that say that, right? So that's the income tax as of we sit here talking now. It's been around 111 years. So that's a Treasury decision every decade saying that 1040s are to be used exclusively by non-resident aliens with U.S. source income or their domestic agent. 11. And you've probably heard me say this before, Chris. So tell me, how many Treasury decisions do you think say that anyone other than a non-resident alien or the non-resident alien's domestic agent is to file a 1040? The answer is 0.
0.
So, and I would love to sit with an IRS official and say to them, so here's what your boss, the Secretary of the Treasury, has said. You're claiming something else. Where's the Treasury decision that supports your position? So I share that to make the point that people who are certified, whatever the hell that means, I think you would agree, Chris, having read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, the people who are certified don't know any of the facts they'll find in Income Tax Shattering the Myths. 0. And my experience with HR people and CFOs and CEOs and tax attorneys, my experience over the last 30 years confirms they don't know what the hell the law says. I had an online conversation with an attorney the other day, and I said, you guys are as bad as the general public. You repeat what someone else told you. You have no idea what the law says. And he shut up and went away because it's true.
We got Nick back.
But he's certified.
Yeah,
that's
go
the
ahead,
important
Dave.
part.
Right. The certification is what
No, I'm
matters,
saying
right?
the attorney has the certification, so that's the important part.
Nick, you had something else?
Sure. Yeah. This was one that I forgot that I had, or really when you talked about a quote unquote financial institution in a very general sense, I understand what you mean by that. Money flowing from one person to another, and they'll treat you that way. So my question is, if I were to form an LLP, like a private placement memorandum, right? So I could form, like, say, a small hedge fund without having to worry about accredited investors and such, right?
Sure.
If I were doing that, would I need to send out like identification type forms on every member of that LLP when we do disbursements? Would I have to send those out to IRS?
That depends. If you have, I'm going to call them customers for the sake of this discussion. If you have customers who are non-resident aliens or foreign corporations, and your LLP is serving as part of the pipeline of U.S. source income to the non-resident alien or foreign corporation, then the LLP would be required to withhold the tax and file the returns and pay it over to the government.
So if they were American persons or LLPs that, let's just use the term service all American persons, nobody's foreign, in that case, would I not be required to send out documents that identify who those members are and the fact that we dispersed to them and how much those disbursements were, et cetera?
Okay, so now
I know that's like, first of all, let me back up. If anybody knew this answer off the top of their head, I would bow down to you. So if you don't know this one off the top of your head, that's super specific. I know you might have to get back to me on this one, but that's just a question that I have.
So here's the thing. what you're getting into now might fall into the category of SEC regulations, not income tax, but there would be no requirement to do that concerning income tax. And by the way, I have a form that I give people for free in place of a Form W-9. So for companies where, say, the owner or the business manager knows the truth of the income tax, and doesn't want to ask their customers or the people they're paying, say their vendors, they don't want to ask their vendors to fill out a W-9. I Anybody who emails me and asks me for this form, it's called a status questionnaire. I just send it to them, so they can use that. And basically, the way the status questionnaire works is this: if the person signs the status questionnaire and checks these boxes, you don't need to get a W-9 from them. If they sign it under penalty of perjury and check these other boxes, then you need to get a W-9 from them.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's like a filter.
Yeah, exactly so. So in your case, where you're talking about this venture that you have in mind, if it were me in your shoes, I would use the status questionnaire to ensure that I am protected, that I'm not dispensing U.S. source income to foreign persons.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So that form would, under penalty of perjury, like obviously, that would serve the purpose of showing that I've done my diligence on all members of the LLP.
Exactly so.
All right, that's good. I may have to fire you off an email. Actually, I emailed you about a week or two ago, and you got back. I'm like, that's amazing. Somebody actually got back. That was really cool. So,
well, yeah, I always say I'm here to try and help people.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again. That's all I had.
Right on. Thanks.
All right, Nick, take care.
All right, let's bring up Mike next. Mike, you had a question? I saw you in the chat, Mike, but yeah, go ahead. You're asking about withholding?
Yeah, I figured I'd pop in. First, I want to tell Dave thanks for his work on the book. I've read a lot of books in my life. I'm 63 years old. It's hands down the best book I've ever read. And in fact,
thank you, Mike.
And in fact, in terms of its impact on my life, though I'm still working through my exit strategy. So thank you for that. And I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on all the material in the book, most of it at least, as much as a guy that's been working on this for about 4 years now can have. But I still, for some reason, I'm struggling with what's the difference between regular withholding and backup withholding. Can you help me understand that a little better?
Sure. Okay, so we have to distinguish the kinds of withholding to begin with. So there's payroll withholding. That's what the public calls it, payroll withholding. The IRS calls it wage withholding. Okay. And then there is generalized withholding, the kind that we've been talking about most frequently during the course of this call. And that is, for instance, when we used the example earlier with Peugeot had sent $1 million to a brokerage firm who invested in Apple. Okay, so that is, we'll call it the high level withholding. Okay, then which is different than wage withholding. So you got this high level or just ordinary withholding, and then you've got wage withholding. Okay, so there is no backup withholding on wage withholding. Let me clarify that. Okay, so we can, in terms of backup withholding, we can take wage withholding and move it out of view. So that leaves us with plain old withholding. Okay, so there are a couple of lengthy documents, but it sounds like you're not averse to research, so I'm going to throw them out there to you.
I'm not.
There's Treasury Decision 8734 and Treasury Decision 8881. Okay. And they talk about withholding and backup withholding. So let me explain how this works. Okay. So remember we talked about the domestic agent, otherwise known as a U.S. person in tax law?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, we're going to go back to the Peugeot and the brokerage and the Apple. Okay. So the American brokerage firm, they need to pay these Apple dividends to Peugeot. So they say to Peugeot, let me go back. Apple says to the brokerage firm, we need to know whether what we're paying is going to a foreign person. So the brokerage firm gives Apple a Form W-9. So then Apple knows it's paying you its own U.S. source income into the pipeline going to the foreign person. Okay. Now, let's say the brokerage firm refuses to give Apple a W-9. That leaves Apple in the position of having no clue where this money is, who the owner is, where this money is going to. So without some form of certification, then Apple would do backup withholding. In other words, Apple's position under the tax code would be, you have refused to give us the correct status of this account. Behind you, the brokerage firm, we don't know whether this is Susie Rottencrotch living in LA, or we don't know whether it's this French corporation. You have left us blind by failing to give us a certification. Certification being under penalty of perjury, right? So in that case, Apple would initiate backup withholding because of the refusal of the brokerage firm to provide information to Apple.
So in essence, it's basically withholding without a form, without a W-9 form or form.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then it would be Apple's responsibility to file a return, a specific return for withholding in that
Gotcha.
circumstance, and to pay that money over to the United States government.
Gotcha. But this doesn't really apply to like regular W-2 employment, payroll type stuff.
Not at all. The two are complete. Yes, when it comes to, and that's the reason I brought up 8734 and 8881 is because if you, I know these are lengthy documents, but in there you will find that backup withholding has no applicability to wage withholding.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps. I don't know for the life of me why I couldn't just kind of put that together myself, but thank you so much. That clarified it.
All right, Mike. Thanks very much for the call.
Have a super day.
Thanks, Mike. All right, just checking the chat one more time, doing a once over. We're coming up about 2 hours here. Yeah, guys, if you have any final things you want, I know there's our guy Kane is just going nuts in the chat right now, but yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to call in.
Mr. All Caps?
Mr. All Caps, yeah, exactly. So yeah, but he's welcome to come in. I mean, we're happy to have him, but I don't know if it's going to happen this time around.
By the way, speaking of guys like him,
yeah,
people ask me why I didn't write Income Tax Shattering the Myths earlier. And I had started and stopped writing it about 6 times. And the reason that I didn't pull the trigger until 2009 and really pump that book out was because if I'm going to charge somebody money, right? I mean, I'm selling the book, yes. I consider it my ethical obligation that I am, if not the national expert on the subject, certainly damn close. Otherwise, ethically, I can't ask people to pay me.
sure.
So the standard I set for myself was if the DOJ tax division, you know what speed dating is?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So imagine it's like a speed dating thing. I'm sitting at a table, and every time the buzzer sounds, another DOJ attorney sits down and hammers me with a question about the income tax, right? And then I answer the question and the buzzer thing, and then the next person. Okay. I set the standard for myself that unless I could completely dispatch every single argument correctly, legally, factually, dispatch and destroy every argument a DOJ tax division attorney would put in front of me until I could say to myself, I can do that, I could not ethically ask anybody else to pay me money for what's in the book. And when I was absolutely certain that I could meet that standard, that's when I published.
It's man of integrity right there. Steve, we had Steve pop in. I don't know if this is our guy, but Steve, you're on. You got a question?
Hey, Moff, how's it going?
Good, man. What's up?
Can you hear me? Hey,
Yep.
Dave, I just wanted to say thank you for your time and work. I really appreciate it. I have implemented the strategy successfully for about 10 years now. I have not had any problems with the IRS. And a question that I get a lot is, how do I shut down an audit? And I know this is highly unlikely especially if you don't fill out the forms, if you don't fill out a W-4. But my response was, and this has not happened to me personally, to tell the IRS to pound sand, to not answer their questions, and say, come back with a court order. What is your answer to that? The audit question. How do I shut down an audit?
Okay. So what the public calls an audit, the Internal Revenue Service calls an examination. And respectfully, I'm going to disagree with your approach to that. Um, remember I talked earlier in the interview about the evidentiary record?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the evidentiary record is part of the response, because here's the thing. I'm trying to go up to the 35,000 foot level on this. So let me get my words correct. Congress has imposed the income tax on, and again, I'm going to ignore the whole living abroad thing. Okay. So I'm just going to focus on two classes. Congress has imposed the income tax on two classes of persons: non-resident aliens and foreign corporations with U.S. source income. So who does the government have authority? Whose tax returns does the government have authority to examine?
I think there's an
Steve,
issue with the audio.
Can you hear?
Steve, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I'm in the car. It's kind of cutting in and out. Hang on. See if I can get a better connection. Are you there?
Yeah.
I am here.
Okay.
Okay. So what I was saying is that Congress has imposed the income tax on those two classes of persons. So in terms of income tax, the IRS has authority to examine tax returns of only the persons upon whom Congress has imposed the tax. So when people say, well, what happens when they want to audit you? Okay. Well, without an evidentiary record established, where you're just some guy saying the words, "I'm not liable," that's going to get somebody nowhere. Okay. There has to be an evidentiary record that, and there's a specific way to provide this to the IRS that literally causes them to shut everything down and walk away. But not responding is not the right answer, because when the government sends a letter, here's what the government typically does. They send a letter where they say, "Hey man, we believe you have to file a 1040. But that's not really what that letter means. Much like the lock-in letter we talked about earlier, what it says on the face is not necessarily what it legally means. Same thing is true here. What that letter actually means in law is the courts have mandated that we must extend a presumptive taxpayer due process to show us that we are mistaken. That's what that letter, when it says, "Hey man, we think you need to file a tax return," that's what it really means. We're functioning under a number of presumptions. We don't have all the necessary facts. We might be wrong. This is your due process opportunity, as constitutionally mandated, for you to explain to us why we are wrong. And as a matter of fact, while it does not say that on the letter, I think they keep renumbering the letters. So I apologize if I have this wrong. I think the latest title for that letter is CP 54, I think. Okay. They've renumbered it a zillion times over the last 30 years. I think the current designation is CP 54. If you look that up on the IRS's website, the second sentence where they describe it says, "This is your opportunity to tell us why we are wrong." So when the government makes an allegation and says, "This is your opportunity to tell us that we are wrong, we are extending you constitutionally mandated due process," my answer is shove it up their ass. Tell them what's going on. Tell them what the law says. Tell them who you are. File affidavits, file statements of law, respond appropriately to the allegation, and they will go away.
Let me ask you this, Dave. What if so over the 10 years, I've heard from them a couple times, but none of the letters have been certified. And they were all essentially, "Hey, you didn't file. If you're required to file, here's a delinquent 1040 for you." So if the letters aren't certified, does that affect does that mean something legally?
That is an opportunity for due process. But apparently, in your case, they took your they did not act on your silence, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Okay. I would just never suggest that somebody go silent. But of course, if they're phrasing it, if they use the word if you're liable, or if you believe you're liable, you must file, then I would leave it alone, because they're not making a declaration that you are required. There are some letters they send out that said, we believe you are required to file. Different language.
Okay, understood. Because they pussyfoot around a lot in my letters. They say maybe, might, could,
Yeah.
possibly. I mean, not legally.
I wouldn't respond to that one either. Yeah. If
Okay.
they're saying, if you're required, then file, I would say, okay, I'll throw it in the trash. I'm not required.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll try to remember the evidentiary record and kind of pivot more in that direction.
Yeah. But by the way, in your case where they use loose language like if, I would not respond. So I agree with with the tactic that you have taken.
Copy. Okay, that makes sense. Well, hey, that's all I got. I really appreciate your time.
Right on. Thanks,
All right,
Steve.
Steve. Have a great day.
Bye.
All right. Good stuff. I'm looking, I'm scanning. We got more guys just yelling about this and that. So, Dave, maybe we just need to do a part 3 when these guys got their notes and are ducks in a row and they want to come with these arguments. I'll set it up. I'll be the mediator. We can go head to head. I'd love to see that. So,
Right on.
Either way, guys, like Dave, this has been great. I appreciate you coming on. Super eye-opening. I've learned a lot from you already, and I've enjoyed having you on the show and talking to you. But tell the people where they can find you. Where can they buy a copy of your book? Where can they find you? I know you're not on YouTube, you're on Rumble, but just kind of give your 30 seconds of plug time.
Awesome. On Rumble, by the way, I think I have now 31 videos about the income tax up on Rumble, in addition to many other topics as well. If you search for Dave Champion, you should find my channel, so go ahead and subscribe to that. I'm also on X, it's Dr. Reality 5, I believe, is on X. By the way, it's Dr. Reality is Dr. Reality, not doctor spelled out. The website where you can get any of my writings, any of my work, is drreality.news, not .com, .news. Same thing when you email me, dave@drreality.news. Chris, can I talk about the specials I'm running right now?
Please.
Okay, so right now I've got 2 specials. I've got something I do every year. It's called the Big Christmas Special. Right now, if you use the coupon code XMIS24, you get 10% off anything and everything that's on the website. Anything you want is 10% off. Also, if you use XMIS24 and your order includes Income Tax Shattering Myths and or Body Science, I will personally inscribe and autograph your copies of those 2 books for you. Conversely, I just released a video several weeks ago about the incoming tariffs. I think everybody's pretty aware that those are coming. Most intelligent people understand that the American people pay tariffs. That when a tariff is imposed, the American people pay that in the cost of a higher cost for the goods they want. So the tariffs are coming. Some people, depending on what they're buying and what their buying habits are, some people will see their federal tax burden double. Most won't see it double, but some will see it double. But the reality is everybody is going to see their federal tax burden increase once these tariffs hit. So with that in mind, for those who think this might be an excellent time to get informed about the income tax and safely walk away, so that here you've been paying all this income tax for these years, and so now you're going to be paying income tax plus the tariffs on top of that. Maybe you want to make the income tax go away so you're not getting double hammered by federal taxation. So if you think this is the right time to do that, and you're not interested in all the other stuff, if you just enter the code tariffs at checkout, you'll get free shipping. So you don't worry about autographs and inscription and stuff like that. And so just enter tariffs and whatever you buy on the website. Oh, as long as I'm sorry, I didn't want to mischaracterize that. As long as the order contains a copy of Income Tax Shattering the Myths, in that case, you get free shipping. Because that's the thing. I really want people to understand the income tax in light of the tariffs that are about to hit.
Right. Yeah, I remember that video. I got to go back through it once or twice more, but there's always good stuff coming out of the Rumble channel, Dave. Well, thanks a lot again. Thanks for having on. I'm going to pull you up and hang out backstage while I wrap this up, and we'll chat here a little bit as we close things out.
Okay, Chris.
All right, guys. Guys, hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you guys want to follow Dave, like I said, drreality.news, buy the book, makes a great Christmas gift. Take advantage of the specials. If you're interested in learning more about, shattering income tax, shattering myths, I've got my copy already. This has been great. So just so you guys know, back here on Monday, Tuesday, we do 4 shows a week now, Monday through Thursday. We're back here for Chopping It Up on Monday at 8 p.m. Ladies Night Tuesday, 8 p.m. The Unplugged Alpha, 12 p.m. on Wednesday. And then I'll have another office hours scheduled for you guys next week at the regular time, 12 p.m. Just wanted to accommodate and make sure we had enough time to grab callers and things like that. But anyway, guys, leave a like on the video. Help spread the word. If this is helpful to you, buy the book. Read it for yourself. There's a lot of naysayers out there. And the great part about the internet and the world we live in is you can go do all this work and all these fact checking and all the research on your own if you just care enough about it. But we're going to sign off, guys. Really enjoyed it. And see you on the next one.